I'm here with Michel Picaud, who is the president of Friends of Notre-Dame, which... De Paris, oh sorry, yes, no, not Notre Dame University. And he is part of a huge philanthropic effort to raise money to support the restoration of Notre-Dame. And he has kindly agreed to come and speak with us about the projects for us in at the Cultural Center of the Lycée Français. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you to you. Yeah.
And so I wanted to start by noting that the Friends of Notre-Dame is an organization that predates the fire.
Yes, exactly.
And so I wanted just to ask you what you were doing before the fire with Notre-Dame, and does that continue, or how has it changed afterwards?
Okay. Yes, actually, Friends of Notre-Dame de Paris was founded 4 years ago, because the cathedral was already in a very bad state. And actually, at that time, the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris discussed with the Ministry of Culture and said, okay, do we have a way to, I would say, restore this cathedral, which is already in a very bad state? So you need to know that the spire, for instance, was already decaying, that the flying buttresses of the choir were in a very bad state. So we had started 4 years ago with this project to raise funds and to complement actually the funds of the French state to accelerate the restoration of the cathedral. Unfortunately, I would say, we have not been quick enough, and the fire happened at a moment where actually we had started the restoration by the part of the cathedral in the worst state, which was the spire. And this is the reason why, so there was this scaffolding around the spire on April 15 when the fire got started.
Right. But luckily, they had removed, right, some of the statues,
Yes,
the
so
statues that were on the spire.
Yes, yes. This is a miracle, and actually, actually there were 16 monumental statues around the bases of the spire, which represented the 12 apostles and the 4 evangelists. And these statues had been removed 4 days before the fire. And the good news, in a way, is that these statues, actually, they are currently under restoration. And last week, I was with Philippe Villeneuve, the architect-in-chief of the historic monuments, with some of the major donors for the restoration of the statues. And actually, at the end of the year, the 16 statues will be restored and ready to be replaced on the spire when the time will come.
Oh, how wonderful! Yeah. Do you still have the statue of Viollet-le-Duc himself?
Yes, yes. Actually, Actually, Viollet-le-Duc actually he gave his own face to the statue of Saint Thomas.
Okay.
And there is a funny story, which is that actually all the statues are looking down to the ground and to the city of Paris, except Viollet-le-Duc, which is looking up to his spire. So this is a bit of
right.
history.
How wonderful. So you were in the process already of doing some very necessary work,
Yes.
which is now, amplified a great deal. How has, and I know that beforehand you were using some very modern techniques. Can you tell us about the laser measuring? I know I'm particularly interested because I'm from Columbia, and Andrew Tallon, who was making those measurements, which got his training at Columbia in the Art History and Archaeology Department.
Actually, Andrew Tallon, you must know that Andrew Tallon was also at the beginning of this creation of Friends of Notre-Dame de Paris. He was one of our board members, and he was the one having, I would say, started the process of raising funds for the cathedral. And effectively, this process was started because Andrew knew very well Notre-Dame de Paris, and he had effectively made the scanning of all the cathedral, and this scanning will be put to the disposal of the architects who will work on the restoration of the cathedral. So for us, it's very precious to have all this work made by Andrew Talan.
It's going to be really necessary in this second phase. So there's the first phase, which is consolidation, and then the second phase, which is testing the structure.
Yes.
Because he took such precise measurements that if anything's moved,
yes, exactly.
They'll know.
Exactly, yes.
Because they can retake the same measurements using the same method.
And Columbia University, as well as the Vassar College, where Andrew worked lately, have all this information and this scanning. So this will be very useful for the restoration. Yeah.
Exactly. So we think Notre-Dame is an old building, but there's a lot of dynamic new things happening in terms of the techniques of how we know about architecture and preservation. It's very avant-garde.
Yeah.
So I was thinking also about your efforts as a fundraiser, as a sort of helping philanthropists, and I also work in philanthropy, and I've worked in philanthropy in France and in America, and it's a new field in France. People are more used to the government paying for things. And I just thought it was interesting what you were saying about the public-private partnership. And also, I'm just wondering what sort of participation or how you're working with French people to make them more aware that they need to contribute.
Actually, what we did before the fire, because this was even before the fire, so we raised funds as well in France as at international level, but mostly in the US. And when we had a plan actually before the fire to restore the cathedral in a time frame of 10 years, just for you to know, because I think in the context of what we are discussing about how long it will take to restore the cathedral, you need to know that before the fire, we had a time frame of 10 years to restore the full cathedral.
Time is money, right? I mean,
time is money, but not only, because you need to plan the works in a certain sequence, and this is not only money.
No, I know. I realize that. I'm sorry. As I was saying that, I thought that sounds horrible, but. It's just because, you hear about like the hundreds of millions of dollars of euros that were offered, and some of them maybe have already been collected from these big, Arnaud and Pinot, right? So the dimension of fundraising is just sort of exponentially larger than your budget originally. Right?
Yes, for
Which
sure.
was like 150 million?
The budget for the restoration before the fire was 150 million. Right. Now the order of magnitude is more 1 billion than 100.
Billion.
Yeah, this is the order of magnitude. So which means that...
Just one, not two?
1 billion, this is what we... Yeah, no, you are right. You are right.
Okay.
So today, what you need to know is that the effort of fundraising as well in France as at international level or in the US has now evidently developed since the fire, and effectively also in the wake of the fire. There was a big outpouring of sympathy, but also of gifts which came to us. But we still have a long way to go, because today we have collected overall probably something like 150 million, so which means that we have also pledges on top of that. We have also pledges on top of that, but we are not at the 1 billion mark, so which means that we have still a long way to go. Yeah.
So when you say we, do you mean Friends of Notre-Dame?
Everybody, no, not Friends of Notre-Dame. I mean the overall cash collection.
What happened to Arnaud and Pinot?
They have pledged. This is Not yet. No. So the cash which has been effectively collected is not the money which has been pledged. So which means that we have still a long way to go to fund the restoration of the cathedral.
What part does the government contribute to this? The French government.
For now, so before the fire, so we had an agreement with the French government that all the money which would be raised with private donors would be matched by the French government. Today, actually, the French government has put in place, I would say, the public agency in charge of managing the restoration of the cathedral, and we are ourselves funding through private donors this project of restoring the cathedral.
So they're not matching anymore?
No. No.
They just have an agency to sort of collect everything.
Exactly, and which manages also the works.
Right. So I'm wondering, I'm wondering what the process is of when you ask people to make donations. Do they feel that then they can express a wish for what they want to support, or what kind of restoration they want to support? Like, what sort of a restoration do you think the people who are contributing?
Actually, the people contribute for the restoration of the cathedral, the reconstruction and the restoration of the cathedral. So some of them express wishes about how it will be restored or how it will be rebuilt. And I can tell you that from all what I read from the donors who came to us, most of them want the cathedral to be restored as it was on April 15 in the morning, in terms of, I would say, appearance. So this is what I hear from the donors.
Right.
But generally, they are donating for the reconstruction of the cathedral.
Be terribly disappointed if it wasn't exactly the way it was on April?
I think some of them would be terribly disappointed. Yes, some of them, and it's curious because the spire, as you know, it dates back from the 19th century. So this is not the original spire, but nonetheless, people have in mind the cathedral as it was on April 15 in the morning.
Well, yes, that's their cathedral. That's
Exactly,
that's how it
exactly.
was. And buildings are levels of history. You know, they're not
Exactly,
all made in.
exactly.
It's only Viollet-le-Duc that said you could go back to one point in time,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So, they're. Although now that, but some people do think that Viollet-le-Duc is not worthy of saving. That Notre-Dame is a Gothic building. Do you feel like that's not the people, your constituency? I sometimes think there should be some education around Viollet-le-Duc. You know, people should learn more about him.
Probably. But what you need to know is that actually when Viollet-le-Duc, for instance, if we remain on the subject of the spire, when Viollet-le-Duc built this spire, there was no spire anymore. Right. Because the spire of the Middle Ages had been brought down because of its state 60 or 70 years before. Right. So, but people have in mind, I would say, the cathedral as it was before the fire.
Right. Well, and it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a masterpiece of each age.
Yeah.
Each age, you know, it would be. I think it would be a tragedy to change the spire because Viollet-le-Duc is one of the world's great architects.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get that in. Sorry.
I just reflect what I read and what I hear from the donors. So this is not my personal opinion, but
in terms of the percentage of your donors, are you working mostly in America then? I know you're a 501c3, so you work with America.
I am in charge of the Friends of Notre-Dame de Paris, which means that I am raising funds from international donors, but mostly American donors.
Really? And why American? That's just your sector? Or are there donors all over the world that are giving?
No, I think there are donors from 50, 70 countries all around the world. But most of the money is coming from the United States. So my personal take on it is that actually there is, I would say, an attachment of American people to Notre-Dame de Paris, to the cathedral, to the monument. And I think this is what makes it so, I would say, important in the mind of American people.
Do you think it has to do with the history, you know, like the reconstruction after the First World War? I was thinking of Reims, you know, rebuilding.
I think this dates back from, for instance, the novel of Victor Hugo, which is very well known here in the US. And you know that from this novel there were many films which were about Notre-Dame de Paris. You had cartoons, you had musicals on Notre-Dame de Paris. So I think Notre-Dame de Paris has an image in the US which is unique among the monuments, the European monuments, or the European cathedrals. So this is what makes it
Can you tell me,
unique.
I read that Disney is one of your donors?
Disney used a lot Notre-Dame de Paris, as you know, in their production. So this is very important for them. Yes, Notre-Dame de Paris is very important for them. Yeah, but not only Disney. So we have many donors all around the U.S. from very small donors to very large donors and major donors. So there are very funny stories. For instance, I received after the fire, I received a donation of $5 from a lady who was in a center for aged people in the middle of the U.S. So as well as donation of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So you see, I would say the spectrum of donors in the U.S. is very large, and this is, for us, it's very nice to see how this cathedral is very dear in the heart of American people.
I think it's interesting, and the American people express that through this tradition of philanthropy, where perhaps a French person would not use money to express.
I think for French people, it's probably a little bit newer, this type of philanthropy. And I think, in a way, this is perhaps one of the good consequences of this fire. I think probably it has triggered, I would say, a philanthropic feeling and approach among French people, which was already pre-existent in the US, because your traditional philanthropy is much older and larger than it is in France. So this is perhaps one of the good consequences of the fire.
Well, that's another sort of chantier, another construction period that will be very interesting to follow. In terms of it, whether it becomes generalized or whether it's just a response to this one disaster, if it can be, because there's so many other religious and secular monuments in France that are being now funded with this partnering of private and public.
Yeah. And this is one of the problems we have in France with the funding of the restoration of historical monuments, because you have about 90 cathedrals in France, like Notre-Dame de Paris, under the responsibility of the French state, which owns this cathedral. So this is a huge task, I would say.
Lots of private churches that are not owned by the state that are just crumbling,
No, actually, in France, it's very simple. Since the law of 1905, all the cathedrals belong to the states and all the churches belong to the cities. Only the churches built, or the cathedrals built after 1905, belong to the church. So most of them, which means that most of them belong to the state or to the cities for the churches.
Right. It's very different landscape than in the United States, to be sure, but very, very fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sharing and all best of luck.
Thank you to Lycée Français for this opportunity. Yes. And let me perhaps, if you allow me, let me thank very much, I would say, the American donors who have been very instrumental in this movement of fundraising since the fire. But last word, perhaps we still have a long way to go, and so I thank them in advance also for their help and their support. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.